Hi everybody. I'm going to share a little bit today about composting. I've been taking some photos that I'll share from around the yard here and hopefully inspire you a little bit if you haven't ever tried composting to see what you can make with your kitchen scraps and keeping stuff local and on site. So I've been gardening for about look at this place, 17 or so years, so quite a while. And we inherited a black composter from the city gives away. We had one of those on site when we moved in, so we just kept using it for our kitchen scraps. Obviously anything with oil or with meat and dairy and grain should not go into the composter because that can attract rats. But otherwise, fruit and vegetable scraps is, especially raw stuff, not cooked stuff, is totally great. So if you're able to get a black composter from the city, if you don't already have one, if you have, a yard to put one in, that's great. If you live in an apartment, you could consider a few other options. You could make friends with a neighbor who's interested in using your kitchen scraps. Or you could get a vermicomposter, which is a composter that you can have in your apartment or in your house that is a sort of a worm factory. And the worms, you have to feed them on a regular basis, and they will consume your compost and produce worm castings, which are also incredible compost manure that you can then put on a garden somewhere. I remember long ago when I was taking a gardening workshop that included some discussion about composting, the lovely woman who was teaching it said, "It's not just compost, it's alive." She was so passionate, having just recently finished a year-long permaculture training, and so it's lovely to sort of to get excited about making compost and sort of to see how important it is in terms of all the microorganisms that are in there and how good it is for the soil. I'm mostly just speaking from the experience of being a gardener, but I will put some links in the notes there, including the work of Elaine Ingham, who is a person who's done a lot of inspiring work about the so-called soil food web. If you want to know more about the science of soil health. So again, why make compost and why, I think keeping compost local or keeping, your food scraps and as many of the nutrients on site, and I'm talking about kitchen scraps as well as about yard waste, keeping those on site because so many people, put it in the green bin and give it away, or put it in the yard waste bag and give it away, and the city has to truck it. I think our kitchen scraps go to Guelph, and yard waste goes somewhere else in the region and gets all processed and then gets, sold or given away. But if you can keep it on site, then it avoids you having to, buy mulch the next season or buy other kinds of fertilizers for your garden. So it's just great to be able to keep it on site. And again, that's a kind of a permaculture principle of that nutrient cycling, keeping it local. So what have we done here in this garden? We have, as I said, both leaves. We have several maple trees and a few other trees on site. So we do a lot of raking of leaves in the fall time, and we have I'll show you a picture of the kind of box made out of wood that we keep most of our leaves in, and they gradually get compacted down with the weathering and decomposition. And then we have a few extra big garbage bins, and we fill those up too, because usually we have overflow surplus. And then again, as they decompose and settle down, we put them into that big wooden composter for the leaves. And then right next to that we have a black composter in which we put our kitchen scraps. And that most people talk about the need to aerate and turn your compost. I have found, and I've been trained by others, that if you layer it appropriately, then you don't actually need to turn the compost, so that makes it way easier, less labor intensive. And so our system is to, when we bring out our kitchen scraps every couple days, from the house, open the black composter, put in the kitchen scraps, and then grab a handful of leaves from the leaf bin. And if it's the middle of winter and the leaves are all kind of frozen solid, then I don't. I still try to put my kitchen scraps out into the composter if there's space for them. And then as soon as the leaves are accessible again, if they're not covered in snow or if they're not frozen solid, then I'll pile some in on top of the kitchen scraps. And the importance of that is that the kitchen scraps, or like the fruit and vegetable waste, is high in nitrogen, and the leaves are high in carbon. And you need to have, I forget exactly the proportion, but it's something like 8:1 of the carbon to the nitrogen. So you should put big handfuls of leaves to decompose and help the decomposition of the nitrogen-rich kitchen scraps. And as I said, I just keep layering those two in there. Sometimes if we cut the grass and have grass clippings, we could put those in there too. If I'm trimming, leaves or small branches from some other, from our grapes and other plants around, then those can go in there too. But essentially it's mostly those kitchen scraps plus the leaves. And after a few months, that will automatically have processed and decomposed down into this dark, moist, rich compost, which then we can spread around the garden. And so 2 or 3 times through the season, from the beginning to, mid-spring maybe, whenever it's kind of accessible, to the end of, sometime in the fall, we will dig out from the bottom of that black composter a few buckets of that finished compost, and we'll spread it around the garden. It's best not to put it direct just on top of the soil and leave it, because it will, I think the sun can sort of, erode or, eliminate some of the benefits. And so it's better that it be covered. So you can dig it into the ground or put some other, leaves or such on top of it. But that works. That's the best way to distribute it. The other ways that I distribute it are I dig a few holes in the ground, and then, before I'm, say, planting tomatoes or other things in the vegetable garden, dig a few holes and just put, half a bucket or a few handfuls, a few scoops of the compost in there and cover it up. And then that'll kind of work itself into the surrounding areas. So those are a few tips. Oh, and then finally, when I'm transplanting things, or let's say I'm going to plant a big a shrub or something, or I've got some pots, for some tomatoes and other things that I happen to be putting into pots. So I will sometimes again put a scoop or more of that compost into the bottom, or mix it in with when I'm transplanting something into a new spot. And this is particularly good if you've got sort of dry, sandy soil that doesn't seem very nutrient rich. This compost is really high in humus, organic matter, and it just keeps the moisture. It attracts earthworms, and it just keeps the soil super fertile. So over time, I just try to spread it around, distribute it in different parts of the garden so that it can benefit all the plants. Let's see, what else? Compost tea. I've only made this a few times, but I know that it's super good. And so another thing you can do, instead of just, a few times a year pulling out the finished compost from the bottom of your composter and distributing it around the garden, to sort of spread it out a little more and make it more abundant for more areas of your garden, you can take a bucket, fill that, a 1/3 to a half full with compost, and then fill the rest up with water, cover it, and keep it, I just sort of keep it beside my hose or something, and stir it every few days, frequently, daily if you like. Some people even go as far as getting like a fish aquarium aerator that keeps, because it would produce the bubbles, and that's what you want. That's why it's also good to be stirring it regularly, and so that the bubbling and the oxygen that goes into that compost tea, it's called, will help that mixture to ferment faster, and that will again decompose and produce super good fertile a liquid that can be, you can either put it in a sort of a spray bottle if you strain out the compost first and just get the liquid, spray it onto the plants, and it protects the leaves from I haven't done too much reading about this, but I believe it protects the leaves from some kinds of pests. But what I usually do is strain it a bit, put it into a watering can, and just put it directly on various plants around the garden, so vegetables as well as ornamental plants. So that's a bit about compost tea, and I just the last couple of seasons of gardening I've had it going for quite a few months, and when it gets a little low, like I say take out most of the liquid or half the liquid from the bucket, I'll just add more liquid, and occasionally, maybe every few weeks, I will add a bit more compost. So usually it's the finished compost that I'm using, but I have heard that things like comfrey, you may see a little bit with the purple flowers behind me and the big sort of fuzzy leaves. Comfrey is also super good for soil fertility. So, I mean, sometimes I just cut it and put that into my black compost bin, but I believe you can also just throw that into the compost tea mix and it decomposes quite quickly. So again, I'm not an expert here. I'm just sort of sharing what I've picked up over the years and giving you some ideas that you can then go and pursue and read more about elsewhere. But just to share my experience of what has worked as well. So I think I'll leave it there. I mean, there's more things I can say about mulching, but I'll probably save that for another time. So happy gardening, and keep the soil healthy.